So American Doomsday Book, Editor's Introduction. In 1085, John Burton, Bishop of Gasbury, writes, William the Conqueror ordered a survey of all the counties of England so that men were then dispatched all over to each shire to find out what and how much each landowner had in land and livestock and what it was worth. What resulted was the great Norman Domesday Book, which gives historians today a remarkably detailed picture of William's Island, almost exactly as it was at the dawn of the new millennium, a millennium that has just now passed into being the old millennium. The collection before you, the American Doomsday Book, volumes 1 through 5, is the result of a 25-year undertaking, whose goal has been, not unlike William the Conqueror's, to present a picture of a great and powerful nation, just as one millennium begins and another closes behind it. The volumes before you are not intended to serve as a history of the United States, or a history of the United States in the 20th century, or even as any kind of history at all. To borrow a terminology from the French linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, if history is diachronic, a study through time, then this project is synchronic, the study of the actions and interactions of a single moment. Like the Domesday Book, these volumes are intended to be something like a recording of the United States at a particular moment in time. Though for philosophers, phenomenologists, and students of perception have always debated and will continue to debate the precise duration of a moment, most of us will agree that it is short, fleeting perhaps, while at the same time made up of several layers of perception, sense perception, rational or intellectual perception, emotional perception, to name a few, and always with the potential to be profound, or at the very least memorable. But nations do not experience time in the same way their individual citizens do. The lifespan of a nation is much longer than our own. And so the synchronic view cannot be limited to a handful of minutes, or a single day, or a year even. The window we've agreed to look through for this project opens January 1st, 1981, and closes December 31st, 2000. Collectively, the editors agreed that these 20 years presented a moment of transition. Whatever it was, a change occurred between the 1970s and the 1980s, even if, for those of us who lived them, 1981 may not have felt a whole lot different from 1979. And now, as the millennium comes to its quiet close, quiet when compared to the panic and apprehension of last year's turning over, one can't help but sense, even if only vaguely, that we are on the verge of yet another, perhaps more fundamental and existential change. This is, of course, all still speculation. It is worth noting, though, that when we first decided to the above and beginning and end dates, we originally had no idea that these dates, too, would correspond roughly with two major crises of the American presidency. January 1st, 1981 is roughly 90 days before the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan, a flash of violence, to use a terminology borrowed from Walter Benjamin, which would shake and reverberate throughout the decade to follow. And December 31st, 2000 is, of course, a mere 8 days after the Supreme Court's decision to award the presidency to George W. Bush, the preceding few months representing a period of great anxiety for the American electorate. All of this was, as we said, mere coincidence, but not all coincidence is to be dismissed as insignificant. So we leave it to you, the reader, to judge whether coincidence in this case is significant or not. Drowned Phoenician Sailor, a novel written by Mark Wittenborn, born 1946, and published by Faber and Faber in 1995. The Drowned Phoenician Sailor stands as unique among Wittenborn's writing as his only published work of literary fiction. Known primarily for science fiction writing, Wittenborn spent 12 years on this slim volume, the first edition hardcover clocking in at only 204 pages. In interviews, Wittenborn has said that the idea for the book came to him all in a flash as he was reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland on a bus ride from Midland, Texas to Oklahoma City. It was all there, right in front of me. All I had to do was write it down, he said. But Wittenborn soon found that he could only work on the book when it was raining. And you know, North Texas, it's sunny 350 days of the year. It could be months, sometimes a year, and I wouldn't get anything done with it. The Drowned Phoenician Sailor tells the story of Harry Moynihan, a young American expat in London, in a kind of self-imposed emotional exile. With drugs and alcohol, he has numbed himself against the memory of a family tragedy that is never fully revealed through the narrative. The novel ends quietly, but rapturously, despite or because of that quietness. An expressionistic book, The Drowned Phoenician Sailor employs a number of Nabokovian textual games in its execution, which were lauded and derided with equal measure by reviewers when it was first published. But whether positive or negative, most reviews tended to express certain surprise at the experimental nature of the book, though that surprise seems somewhat unwarranted when one takes into consideration Wittenberg's path-breaking work of science fiction, The Ambulance Pays Its Own Rent, See Entry, itself an incredibly experimental book. If The Drowned Phoenician Sailor is a book that can only be written in the rain, it's also a book that can only be read in the rain. Wittenberg's novel is draped in a gray melancholy, and its language seems to grow like shoots down into the slow wetness of time. One reviewer compared certain of the book's passages to Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, though without Burton's tongue and Burton's cheek. When I finished, the reviewer wrote, "In the late afternoon, I curled up in my bed and stayed there until the next morning." Indeed, Wittenberg's book has been blamed for months, perhaps years' worth of absenteeism on the parts of readers who, upon finishing, were unable to return to the normal rhythm of their daily lives for some time, and only then after the greatest of efforts. Alistair Penobscot, 1958 to 1995, American. Born Ronald Felton in Columbus, Ohio, Penobscot had his name legally changed in 1971 while a student at the Rhode Island School of Design. He was best known as a conceptual and installment artist whose artistic pranks were celebrated through much of the art world for the first half of the 1980s. His most regarded, most written about work, Geronimo's Savannah, 1979, comprised a family of 3 live giraffes, which he released into the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge in southwestern Oklahoma. Amongst Penobscot's papers were found a handful of receipts and a shipping manifest that seemed to indicate that the giraffes were originally purchased from the Lower Midlands Ranch in South Texas, which at the time specialized in providing wealthy American trophy hunters an authentic safari experience. At the ranch, hunters could purchase licenses to shoot and kill an ibex, water buffalo, lion, and any and all manner of exotic beasts. And its clientele is supposed to have included actors, corporate heads, and at least 2 American vice presidents. The adult male and female giraffes were originally obtained by the ranch when the local circus troupe went bankrupt, and the juvenile male was born in captivity soon thereafter. Though details are few, most scholars of his work believe that Penobscot acquired an open-top boxcar from a defunct carnival out of Tallahassee, though some argue Panama City, for transport of the animals, which appears on the shipping manifests as miscellaneous boxcars / miscellaneous livestock, but which disappears through a series of transfers between the ranch and its final destination. Penobscot had apparently taken care to cover his tracks in the Byzantine North Texas shipping schedules at the time. In all likelihood, the mysterious boxcar ended up in the stockyards of Indiahoma, Oklahoma, several miles from the southwestern edge of the wildlife refuge. It is unclear how he was able to transport the giraffes from there to the refuge proper. Under the cover of darkness, certainly, and it must be assumed that such an undertaking would have been impossible to accomplish without assistance. But as of this writing, no one has come forward to admit having had a hand in the project. What is just as confounding, perhaps, is the total lack of eyewitness to the transport. Surely, darkness or no, someone in one of those sleepy cattle towns between Indiahoma and the wildlife refuge, some solitary insomniac, would have looked out his window and seen the slow-moving, jointed silhouettes of the giraffes as they were herded by, or would have glimpsed their long necks towering from the bed of an old truck, ducking their heads and extending their lips towards the starry sky as if to kiss it as they passed beneath a row of telephone lines. But again, no one has come forward, and perhaps that insomniac witness does exist somewhere, but has convinced himself it was only a waking dream. Jean-Pierre Jeannot has written that Penobscot's giraffes set loose in the plains of the American heartland, at once beautiful and discordant, are a shocking interrogation of the trusted semiotics of space, geographical space, temporal space, and historical space. They encourage the viewer to look without comment while simultaneously resisting certain comfortable gestures towards closure, typical of outmoded, overly didactic strategies of interpretation. Once released, it didn't take long for park rangers to capture Penobscot's mature giraffes. 3 days for the male, 4 days for the female. But the juvenile eluded capture for some weeks, and was spotted by hikers and campers in every corner of the refuge, no matter how improbable. In woods and atop granite ridges, fording creeks or wading through a buffalo herd, drinking from the placid surfaces of man-made lakes just after dawn. It was only after the young giraffe had taken ill, the result of a diet consisting mostly of post oak leaves, whose waxy surface he was unable to pass completely through his gut, that he was finally captured and subsequently given over to a zoo in Kansas City. But for those few days when the family was whole and roaming the refuge, what a marvelous sight it must have been. The sun coming up over the granite hills and loping out of the orange light, their shadows elongated and rocking side to side as they ran, like the canted masts of 3 sailing ships bringing terrific or terrible news, this family of giraffes, running as nothing has ever run. You could not help but look on as they passed, awestruck, frozen in a state of reverie as these creatures, which by any reckoning belonged elsewhere, materialized and passed by, the prairie before you a place of magic, a wondrous veldt where the dreams and nightmares of the past ran headlong and collided with all that was present with all that was possible in the present. Penobscot died in 1995 in New York City's East Village, where he had spent the last several years of his life sketching close to 2,000 surrealist architectural designs and working as an assistant manager in the classical music department at a Tower Records. Thank you.